basically 411 here, coming straight out of Boise, back at you with another YouTube video. And today we'll be debunking another mysterious conspiracy theory. And this is arguably one of my most favorite conspiracy theories out there. This one involves the Iraqi Stargate and how the US arguably committed one of its biggest military blunders to gain possession of this Stargate. And how we pretty much overthrew Saddam's government over this technology. So before we actually get into it, we're going to kind of go into a little bit of backstory involving this. So before we get into the actual conspiracy theory, we need to do a little bit of backstory on some of the beliefs that this kind of comes from. So for any of you guys who grew up with the History Channel, you would be familiar with the show Ancient Aliens. Well, if you've seen the show Ancient Aliens, you would know that in their belief system that aliens pretty much was a part of mankind and helped mankind out. And how basically how the Anunnaki, which is like aliens, helped the ancient Sumerians out. And apparently one of the ways that they helped out the ancient Sumerians was they pretty much just gave them tech. Well, one of the technological things that they gave them was these Stargate things. For you guys who don't know what a Stargate is it's pretty much a teleporter thing that pretty much makes it to where you're able to go on the outside of like the universe thing, and how these were actually a thing. And apparently if you go out throughout there's multiple ones, with a couple being all over, with the most famous ones being ones at Gaza, or not Gaza, but the Pyramid of Giza, and also Stonehenge. Well, apparently, two of these are located in Iraq. One being in Nasrallah city in Iraq at the Great Ziggurat, which is like a temple almost, and then the second one being in Saddam's basement in Baghdad, Iraq. So the first one that we're going to be debunking is the one in Nasrallah, Iraq, at the Great Ziggurat of Ur, which was pretty much the site of this ancient city and also this temple. Ziggurat of Ur is a part of basically like a temple complex where they did administrative things in the city, and pretty much what it was like a shrine to their patron, which was a moon god. Just in general, if you aren't thinking in conspiracy talk, you're probably thinking, well, it's pretty much just a great temple and it's a really awesome place. But if we're going by what conspiracy theorists believe, this is the site of the first Stargate. So the whole conspiracy theory kind of starts with Saddam Hussein, who in the 1980s, he pretty much did some restoration on it. Well, in turn, this has led the believers of the conspiracy to believe that the reason why Saddam did restoration on the Ziggurat in the first place was he wanted to pretty much hide the fact that he had this really awesome, I guess, weapon thing. Which, to be honest, this is kind of where I have the first issue with it. So, with my first point I'm going to make is, you know, if you're kind of going by what Saddam's political beliefs were, which was he was a Ba'athist, which for you guys who don't know, that was like the political party that he belonged to. And there's a bunch of other stuff, but one of the key things in there is the fact that there's kind of like an Arab nationalism in there, and pan-Arabism, if I can get that correctly. And pretty much, you know, like any other nationalist parties, so like let's say for example the Nazis, you know, there's this belief that your people are like the best people, and that no matter what, your ancestors are awesome and you need to do this. And, you know, if anything, one could easily make the argument that the reason why he wanted to restore this, or as you'll see in one of the articles that I'll be sourcing, is that he kind of wanted to get rid of the whole sectarian violence thing that was going on, or not sectarian violence, but the whole sectarian rivalry. And as a military historian, there's the second issue I have with this. So, as we would find out during the first Persian Gulf War of 1991, what Saddam had a tendency of doing was he had a tendency of taking his military hardware and putting it close to archaeological and historical sites in the hopes that the coalition forces wouldn't bomb it. Well, it just so happens that one of these places that he put his military hardware was next to this temple thing. Well, and to be very specific, he was parking his MiGs, which, for you guys who don't know what MiGs are, MiGs are a type of fighter jet that was developed by the Soviets. But anyway, I digress. Why would, if you had a Stargate there, and if you knew that you had this, I guess, awesome weapon, well, why would you be parking your military hardware there in the first place, knowing that it could possibly end up getting bombed? And it did end up getting, the area ended up getting bombed, and in turn ended up damaging, I guess, some of the parts that got restored. It just makes no sense to me. So, as I said, personally, if I was Saddam and I had this thing, I would actually probably want to keep either my military forces just away from it and try to hide it, or I would have just probably done more, I guess, to defend it instead of just like parking random things there. And then, of course, there is the whole aspect of, well, how was he able to hide this thing? You just can't hide stuff like that. Then there is what has occurred in, I guess, the most recent conflict in Iraq in 2003, when the U.S. pretty much invaded Iraq illegally, where as a direct result of the invasion, the site became pretty much an area that the U.S. troops kind of congregated. They actually ended up building a base there where they ended up housing troops, which to this I say, well, if there was a Stargate there, why hasn't any troops come out of the woodwork and said that there has been a Stargate there? There's no way you can hide something like that without there not being a whistleblower. There have had to have been some Joe Blow trooper that's like, hey, there's a Stargate here. And from what I'm aware of, there's no reports or even evidence of it. So it's not like somebody could be like, hey, there's this here. You have to show evidence, such as picture proof or just any other, I guess, means of proving your statement. And once again, how are you going to be able to hide this from troops? Now, you could say, well, if you do some research, you'll find that the area actually became restricted. And to this I say, well, the reason why they ended up restricting it in the first place was because U.S. troops and U.S. airmen pretty much went in the area and was destroying stuff. It wasn't restricted before then. It was restricted only after troops had come in there and ruined some stuff. So, with that being said, you know, it makes sense if you're going to destroy stuff, you end up being restricted. And either way, it wasn't entirely restricted. You had to take, I guess, a really special, like, guided tour. Or just in general, the area wasn't entirely cut off. It was just, I guess, restricted to people. And now we get to go to the fun one, the second one that is supposedly in Saddam's basement. So, but before then, I'm going to add a little bit more context. So, in 2003, if we're going by the media narrative of the reason why the U.S. pretty much invaded Iraq, we went over there because of weapons of mass destruction, except that they ended up not finding weapons, or we ended up going there because of the whole thing of oil, which, let's be honest, that's probably realistically the more rational of the two, you know, not getting into my own little conspiracy theories. But if we're going by these conspiracy nuts, the reason why we ended up going into Iraq in the first place was because of these Stargates. Because for starters, the Bush wanted to get a hold of them, and then also because apparently Saddam Hussein was going to be a really awesome guy, and I guess disclose the fact that these things existed. And as a direct result, you know, that kind of made the New World Order, which, let's be honest, that probably doesn't exist, a little angry. So as a direct result, they wanted to punish him, and by punishing him, invading his whole country. So yes, you heard that correctly. The U.S. invaded Iraq, caused the deaths of a couple 100,000 people over a imaginary space thingamajigger. Or that's what the conspiracy theorists say. And to that to me makes no sense. But anyway, the other one of these magical things was supposed to be in Saddam's basement in his palace. So what ended up happening was the U.S. invaded Iraq, ended up eventually taking over Baghdad. And in Baghdad, pretty much where the Baathists were in power, and also where Saddam's palace was, so where the supposed Stargate was was in this zone called the Green Zone. So, for you guys who don't know what the Green Zone was, the Green Zone is pretty much an area where you could say the coalition forces pretty much tried to set up the Iraqi government, or the new one that we were going to try to build. Now, for you guys who don't know what ended up happening as a direct result of us pretty much going into this country and invading it, we ended up destabilizing it. And as a direct result, we ended up pretty much causing a full-blown civil war between the Sunni Muslims and the Shiite Muslims in the area. Well, what happens when you pretty much got a civil war going on? Things get more violent. Well, as a direct result, the Green Zone ended up getting extremely violent. And then as a direct result, the U.S. ended up having to restrict it. Well, if you're going by the conspiracy theorist logic, that means they're hiding something, not because, people are in danger, but because they're trying to hide something. Which then, of course, gets me to this other part of the conspiracy theory, which is crazy. So let's fast forward 3 years and let's get to the surge. For you guys who don't know what the surge was, as a direct result of the increased violence that was going on in Iraq, the Bush administration ended up sending 30,000 more troops, with a good portion of them going into Baghdad as a direct result to try to quell the violence in the area. Well, what they believe is that the reason why they sent the troops was so they could defend the Iraqi Stargate war, which makes no sense. Which, when you think about it, it's actually kind of messed up. It's like, hey, we're trying to stop a civil war here, and people, pretty much trying to unmess ourselves. It doesn't matter the fact that we pretty much destroyed a whole entire government and stuff. But the reason why we ended up sending more troops was because we wanted to defend this magical thing that we got. Which to me is just absurd. Seriously, why do you need 30,000 troops to defend something that's supposed to be secret in the first place? But anyway, I digress from that point. So, if there was a Stargate in Saddam's basement, once again, why hasn't there been any reports of it? I'm pretty sure that, in his basement, they kept political dissidents. They pretty much, I think, tortured people there. Some of which survived. Well, why didn't they say, hey, he's hiding this thing there? I said it's completely absurd to me. It makes no sense that nobody has reported this. And then, of course, there's the aspect of, well, how would they be able to, I guess, get it? How would they be able to test the thing? Because you would think, if you would be able to do some, magical science thingamajigger that I know they probably had at the time, you would be able to pinpoint, I guess, some really weird anomalies in the area, which I'm pretty sure if you did research, you would not find. There's these weird anomalies. And then also there's the aspect of, well, I'm pretty sure everybody else in the coalition would have known about this, so why haven't they discussed it? And then, of course, there's the aspect that, well, the international community probably would have known. So, in other words, all the European governments probably would have known that the U.S. invaded them over the Stargate. And as far as I'm concerned, we're pretty much extremely criticized for invading the country in the first place. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably one of the worst things that the U.S. has probably done. I'm going to say about the last, 30 years, if not within, who knows when. You would think that people would be pissed off at the U.S. enough to be like, hey, you guys invaded them over this. This is stupid. And in my honest opinion, I really don't like the fact that this thing's spreading, because essentially what it's doing is it's spreading a really bad false narrative about the Iraq War that quite honestly really shouldn't even be thought of. I said you have 100,000 people or more that have died as a direct result of that conflict and caused ISIS to end up becoming a thing. And then here we have these crazy conspiracy nuts saying that pretty much the reason why it happened was because the U.S. wanted some magical space thingamajigger. Once again, there's no proof. You come on, you can't prove it. Unless I see a magical thingamajigger shooting up from the sky and seeing a laser beam, I'm not going to believe it. And then once again, when you actually do research into this stuff, rationally, you can't find proof. And yes, I mean, like all conspiracy theories, and it leads to a bunch of rabbit holes. You'll end up finding like interesting things, like you'll end up researching random stuff. But just from a logical point of view, you really can prove this stuff to actually not be a thing. It just takes research. And once again, I just find it really insulting to, I guess, the whole aspect of this, that, you know, you're pretty much spreading this false information. And if anything, too, it really is kind of spreading like false history, and also it's kind of insulting, I want to say, because yeah, you're kind of insulting. It's kind of like, just makes no sense to me, like why people would do such a thing. Anyway, so this is so basically 411 here. Come back next week for a video. I hope this video was good. I'm going to try to get better with this. Just give me some time. But anyway, I hope you guys are staying safe. I hope you guys are keeping your mask on. Have a good week and stay safe, and also enjoy the last days of summer, because you know the fall's coming.